and all you know is that for whatever reason, you cannot get that ice cream out of your mind. It never even occurs to you that you should have gone to bed 3 hours earlier the night before.
That is a fabulous example, and I'm going to borrow.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. The proceeds of this monetized episode are going towards I Am Dying Out Loud. Find out more in the description. Dr. Andy Thomson, thank you so much for joining me yet again for a second episode. I really appreciate having you on. I mentioned to you a moment ago, the last time you were on an episode of the show, people really liked your opinions, and I had a couple of people tell me that I think they actually ordered your book and read your book and enjoyed it as well. So thanks again for coming back to talk to me about yet another topic. I really appreciate your time.
Well, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I think obviously this material is important.
Yes, absolutely. So for anybody who may not have seen your first episode, can you give us just a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Certainly. I'm a psychiatrist. Currently, I am a staff psychiatrist at University of Virginia Student Health Center, the Counseling and Psychological Services. I guess my focus has been general psychiatry, but I mean, this is how things change. A friend gave me a book back in the late 90s, Robert Wright's The Moral Animal, and it got me interested in evolutionary psychology, and that ultimately led to an interest in terrorism, religion, and now the most recent thing is free will. And what I was going to focus on today, most people, when they talk about the current ideas of free will, appropriately talk about it in terms of the criminal justice system and how our current understanding of free will really demands a change in the criminal justice system. But I thought today I might, again, just go over some of the evidence for the absence of free will, the illusion of free will, and how I think it influences or should influence the mental health business, both from if there are people in the audience who are mental health professionals, work in the field, and also all of us are patients or potential patients, and how it applies to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am so excited to talk to you about that. So what was it about this topic that first kind of piqued your interest and made you switch your focus?
Well, I'm still focused on the other things. This is just a sort of a new area, because I think, again, it overlaps with everything else. I mean, it's neuroscience. It's the mind is what the brain does. The brain evolved under the same rules of natural selection as every other aspects of our biology. And the field of neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience, I think, an additional avenue is it's pointing us in a direction of questioning free will. And if people like what I say today, I want to be really clear from the outset that what I'm doing is incorporating the work of Sam Harris, Robert Sapolsky, Jerry Coyne in particular. Those are the three people that have influenced me the most. And really the ideas that I'm communicating about free will or the absence of free will come from their work. And I would encourage anybody who finds this interesting to pursue their books, their podcasts, their interviews. I think there's plenty out there that's very good. And what people will hear from me today is sort of my synthesis of it, and then the angle that I'm bringing to it that is not out there, or at least I've not seen out there yet, is the impact on how mental health practitioners should view their work, and also how patients should view whatever they're struggling with, and also what they should look for in a therapist or mental health professional.
When you say the absence of free will, you're saying that in your opinion and based on science, there is no free will in human beings.
Right. That I think the evidence is overwhelming that
yes.
We do not have free will. And we have a persistent illusion of free will. All of us feel as if we have conscious agency over our intentions, our thoughts, our actions, our desires. But the evidence is pretty clear, at least in my opinion, and the opinion of those whose work I respect, that you can't say there's just no place for free will, other than we've evolved a persistent illusion that we have total agency over our wishes, our thoughts, our desires, and we simply don't. And it shifts our understanding of moral responsibility, culpability, but also just basically who we are moment to moment in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with the idea that there is no free will, I know a lot of people might listen to this and be like, oh my gosh, that's scary. What do I do now? Why should we be afraid or not be afraid of this idea? And then how does that impact the role of a mental health professional or somebody seeking a mental health professional?
That's a very rich question. Let me see if I can go at it. And if something piques your interest or you want me to pursue further, just please interrupt and
yeah, sure.
And guide me in the direction you think the listeners would want. Let me back up for a minute, because I think if you think about it, if there is no free will, it's nothing to be scared of. It means that you are not responsible. You didn't pick your parents. You didn't pick where you were born. You didn't pick the circumstances under which you grew up. You didn't pick your environment, your culture. Your thoughts just arise. Your behaviors just arise, and you try to move with the flow as best you can. I think the absence of free will also tells us, everybody thinks, well, if everything is determinism, then we're locked in. And that's not the case, that we are open systems and we are available to change. The biology of behavior is as Sapolsky says, the biology of behavior is the biology of change. Knowledge is something that changes our brain. And so I think the implications are, as you stay open to experience, you try to expose yourself to the most helpful experiences, the areas that have the best knowledge, and try to move into those. Another thing I think it tells us is it helps us take a position of just committing ourselves to, as best we can, our own well-being, the well-being of others. I think it removes us from what most of us suffer is a lot of internal recrimination.
Yes.
One of the cardinal insights on this comes from Jerry Coyne, and the idea that somehow we could have done differently than we did. Let me see if I can illustrate this so that somebody who's listening to the podcast right now, for instance, they can decide right now to turn it off, to leave and to turn it off. They cannot now decide not to have come 5 or 10 minutes ago.
Right.
To say that they could have done differently is simply empirically not viable. And I think that helps all of us, I hope, move away from recrimination of others, but particularly recrimination of ourselves, that we do the best we can. Yes, we all have regrets, but I think you want to move away from a position of recrimination, internal attack. I could have done differently. I should have done differently. No. The decisions we made were the only decisions we could make at that moment in time.
Right.
And that none of us can be anywhere close to being aware of all the things that go into our decisions and our behavior.
So the difference between having free will versus making a decision is, and feel free to correct me if I say this wrong, but you're saying even though in a moment you might have things to choose from, you don't get to decide what those things are that you choose from. You just get to make a decision based on what you're given outside of any aspect of free will.
Yes, and the choice you make, your brain made upwards of seconds before you become conscious of it.
Got it.
The example I like to use is that if you're on a hike and you come to a fork in the road, and you've never been there before, and you've got to choose, well, do I go up the hill to the right, or do I take the trail to the left? And you decide to take the trail to the right. What we now know is your brain has made that decision upwards of half a second or more before you were even conscious of it.
That's so interesting.
And there are other experiments that show that there are areas of the brain that make decisions on certain things even more than half a second. I don't remember all the time sequences, but when we are conscious of a decision, our brain made that decision in any reasonable sense long before we were conscious of it.
Got it.
So we just, we're going with the flow. And again, I like some of the work that says if you think about the concept of free will, there are problems with it. And one of the biggest problems is that you're saying that there's some neuron or neuronal network in your brain, which is in your brain, but somehow not of your brain. In other words,
right.
you're saying there's some neurons or neuronal networks that are not influenced by the myriad things that impact our brains. And the mind is what the brain does. And again, I think Sapolsky does a beautiful job of at any given moment, like if we just take this moment in time, you and I are at this moment in time, the sensory environment a few seconds before. And actually, let me make sure I get this right. I made some notes, so I want to get this list right. Sure. So let me get, yeah, I mean, another way of thinking of it, use your free will not to hear my voice. Use your free will not to understand what I'm saying. So those are, two of Sam Harris's, I think, nice examples. But
so the idea that some people believe we have ultimate free will would need to apply to everything, not just a couple decisions here and there. It's like if you truly have free will, especially in terms of, say, for example, God, then you should be able to rewind decisions that you made, or you should be able to turn off abilities and things like that if it is total free will.
Right. And that I think it's Jonathan Harari makes the case that free will is real, at least a lot of our cultural view of free will is a holdover from Christian myths that we have an eternal soul that was given to us by God, and that we exercise free will in our righteous or sinful decisions, and that justifies God's punishment, that justifies all sorts of moral strictures that come out of religion. And again, it's based on the idea that somehow we could have done otherwise, and the agent of that doing otherwise is our eternal soul. And that is simply, I think the evidence is pretty clear, wrong. And if you are imagining a concept of a soul, you're saying that there's something, again, that's in your brain, in your mind, but somehow not of it, not influenced by all the myriad things that influence it. And let me pull up that list, because I think it's a great one from like 1 second to millions of years ago. And this is a list that is Sapolsky's list primarily, but also some additions. So at any given moment in time, all of us as people are the sensory environment from a few seconds ago, our blood glucose level, the levels of hormones, the quality and quantity of sleep you and I had last night, the cognitive load that we're carrying right now prior to any decisions or discussions or behaviors, heavily influenced by how much cognitive load we're carrying, which is again related to stress, how much pain we're in. If we've got physical pain right now, that's going to influence us and influence the level of our stress hormones. For men in particular, the presence of an attractive woman. If we're with other people, the smell from a frightened individual. So that's just, the current situation that impacts our functioning, our personal, our personhood in the world. Okay, that's just, right now. Let's keep going backwards. So stress in the last 3 months, we know that has huge impact on neuroplasticity, and it significantly impacts our brain and our functioning, just the amount of stress you and I have been under for the last 3 months. Our gut biome, we know, has impact on our brains. Looks like I'm going into the dark. I don't know if that's because they think I'm, I think my thing changed there. I think that looks better.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. So family socioeconomic status. Our current socioeconomic status has huge impact on who we are at this moment. We now know, for instance, that the family socioeconomic status when we're children has an impact on the development of our prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, basically, fear versus control. I think maybe, certainly if there are mental health professionals in the audience, I think all of us ought to be familiar with something called adverse childhood experiences. I don't know if you've ever heard of ACEs. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of that?
I have heard of it, but I don't know a lot about it.
So this was actually an internist, Vincent Folletti, back in the, I think, 1980s, who was working for Kaiser Permanente. They asked him to look at that. They were having huge increase in serious obesity, morbid obesity, and to look for the reasons. And what he stumbled upon was one of the biggest factors that shaped people's obesity and their health, and now we know also emotional lives, were what are called adverse childhood experiences. I'd encourage anybody to look those up. They're called ACEs. There are 10 of them. And there's huge data. There's solid data behind these things. And the ACEs are, childhood physical abuse, childhood sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, witnessing domestic violence, family member with mental illness, family member with drug abuse, watching the dissolution of a parental marriage, family member in jail. I think I've got all 10 of them there. But there's solid empirical data about the phenomenal impact those ACEs have on our physical being, our emotional lives. So we know, okay, family socioeconomic status. So let's just keep, again, taking the two of us at this moment in time, you and I are shaped by our adolescence and young adult development. And one of the interesting things here is that adolescence and young adulthood is when we become more or less who we are.
Right.
Our frontal lobes become mature. And those are largely, again, shaped by experience. Right. And that's one of the things where we're shaped that has, not a lot of, well, some, but the older we get, it's sort of, at least in that period of time, the less genetic impact, it's the environment. I mean, you and I didn't choose the environment that we lived in our adolescence and late adolescence, young adulthood. Right. And again, hugely impacted by your ACE scores. Childhood development, again, we know it has huge impact on who you and I are in this moment, right? And the attachment in the first year of life. that has huge impact going forward. Our perinatal environment. So when we were in our mother's womb, if our mother was under stress, that impacts our brain. If our mother was starving and we were, in a sense, hungry in the womb, we now know that impacts our risk for heart disease when we're adults, right?
Wow, that's
and
wild.
That's yeah. Anybody who's interested in it, look up it was a British cardiologist that figured this out, the Barker hypothesis. And we now know that early, the impact while we're still in the womb. So it's not like you and I are making any choices over this. We're not exercising our free will when we're in the womb.
Right.
But what is happening is going to affect and can have effect on who we are, who you and I are at this moment in time, and the choices we make. The Dutch keep fantastic records, and tragically, they had records of the children who were born during the Nazi hunger winter, the Dutch hunger winter, 1942-43, and 20 years later, they followed these children who were born of mothers in northern Holland who were starved, and higher rates of obesity, I think, but much higher rates of antisocial personality in men. Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, so this is, going to be criminal behavior, but did these men choose the Nazi starvation of their mothers that affected them in the womb? And this is the whole area of epigenetics, where we know in prenatal life that impacts who we become as adults. Right. So epigenetics, then also the culture that we grow up in. Do you grow up in a collectivist culture like in Japan? Do you grow up in an individualistic culture like Texas? Do you grow up in a culture that is pastoralist? Is it like the southeastern United States, the states of the old Confederacy, cultures of honor, Tennessee? Those shape us, our personalities and who we are. And then the ecosystem, did we grow up in rainforests or did we grow up in deserts? And they actually shape the kinds of religions that exist, which then impact us. And then, so as you see, we're going back from right now, this moment in time, and we're, back to when we were born or before we were born.
Right.
And you keep going back. So we're also impacted by being mammals, by being primates, by being hominids, by millions of years of evolution of our species as mammals, and we're the last surviving hominid. And then, of course, you get to the some would argue like the fundamental piece, of course, is genetics, DNA.
Right.
And I think it's an Australian poet, Les Murray, I think his thing, life's slim volume spirally bound.
That's cool.
So genetics. So you've got, and we all carry, I think it's on our chromosome 1. We carry the remnant of the original replicating RNA molecule.
That's wild.
So, millions, billions of years, all the way to the sensory environment in this moment in time affect our choices and behaviors. So that's a long-winded way of saying, show me where the free will is in that.
Right. And so that being said, when we understand this and when we come to know this, how would someone, say a mental health professional, be able to help somebody without just saying they can't help what they're doing? They're not, like, they don't have any free will, they didn't mean it, et cetera, et cetera. How does this information then help us navigate those situations without just having a bunch of people committing crimes and things with no consequence because they couldn't help it?
Well, I think that's where people, and I think this is where the compatibilists who want to argue that there's some biological determinism and we still have free will in there somewhere because of that very fear.
Right.
No, people are still responsible for their actions, but the concept of sort of moral responsibility, they could have done otherwise, that gets, I think, put aside. So, right, there's a difference between somebody's got a gun to my head and basically, in a sense, forces me to shoot somebody or rob a bank. Okay, now I made those decisions. I'm responsible, but the view of my actions is going to be different from the person that just on their own murdered somebody or robbed a bank. Right? Both of us are responsible, but then deciding how to deal with it is going to be completely different. But our system of retributive justice, of punishment of the guy that just robs the bank, is based on a notion that they somehow could have done otherwise. And so you treat it like a public health problem. Okay, is this individual dangerous? And if he's dangerous, then we are responsible to protect society. We are also, we want to protect him. And an analogy would be, if I've got a car that's broken, do I kick it? Do I punish it? Do I bang a sledgehammer against it? No, I either fix the car, or if it's not fit to be on the road, I put it someplace where it's not going to hurt somebody. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way you want to approach it. But the notion that somehow people are not responsible, the idea here is that you and I, in the typical view, you and I are not morally responsible for our past actions, our past bad actions. I mean, we could not have done otherwise. And do we choose to, feel regret? Do we choose to try to make amends? I think that's all in the mix. Or are we narcissistic as hell and say, well, it wasn't my fault. I'm not responsible. And, that tells me something about that person's mind. They had no choice over who they became, mm-hmm. right? But that tells me something about that person's mind. And then we're responsible as a society to either repair it or protect others from it.
So it's the difference between the natural instinct to be inclined to do something versus deciding then to do that because our brain is inclined to do it. For example, like maybe having an addiction to like nicotine or something. You try the cigarette, like that was the choice, but the fact that you're addicted to it is not the free will aspect of it. Or I know people say with like sex offenders, you can have the predisposition to be attracted to minors without acting on that predisposition to be attracted to minors. Is that correct? Or is that?
No, I think that goes to the issues you raise, go to the heart of the problem that I think, or the problems that get in the way of people understanding the absence of free will. Because people hear the absence of free will, it means, well, everybody's going to turn into a bank robber and they're not going to be held consequent. Okay, let's take your examples. Nicotine, right? We know that nicotine is probably the most addictive substance known to man. Mm-hmm. But what most people don't know is that we are probably human beings. We're probably the last surviving hominid, in part because our species used plant neurotoxins to kill parasites.
Interesting.
One of the reasons that we may be the last surviving hominid is that we became meat eaters, okay, and high sources of protein. But when we became meat eaters, it exposed us to more infections, particularly parasitic infections. So we helped our immune system by using plant neurotoxins. Nicotine kills worms. And most people don't realize it, but you and I have a liver you and I have a liver that is designed, that evolved to take in nicotine and keep a particular blood level of it, because nicotine, if we do too much, can actually kill us. I mean, I think a child can die if it eats a pack of cigarettes. I mean, it's very toxic.
Yeah.
But you and I, even if we're smokers, we keep a particular range of nicotine in our bloodstream, and we're designed to do that. You and I mean, if it weren't for coffee, I'd have no discernible personality. And caffeine is, again, a plant neurotoxin that we use to kill parasites. Caffeine, marijuana, cannabis, nicotine in particular. Nicotine is, particularly effective. And we may be human beings, we may owe some of who we are because we practice what's called pharmacophagy, meaning eating drugs that helped us deal with the parasites that we got from meat eating. Anybody that's interested in this, it's the anthropologist at Washington State, Ed Hagen, has a paper called Homo Medicus, which is, if you're interested, and he's got some other papers, but absolutely worth looking at. So all of us are designed to use these plant neurotoxins. And in the modern world, we get them in really big doses. I mean, the cannabis that you and I can now get is much more potent than wild cannabis.
Right.
So the modern world gives it to us in novel doses that can, get us more easily addicted. And those plant substances are also useful at reducing stress. And alcohol. Alcohol was one of our original antimicrobials. And again, anyone interested in this, it's Robin Dunbar has a great article in the Financial Times of London that came out of a conference they had on how alcohol, we owe civilization to alcohol, because we didn't have antibiotics and we didn't have, civil engineering and, good waste systems in cities. And so all of us drank alcohol as an antimicrobial.
And isn't alcohol one of those things that you can also be genetically predisposed to use, or am I making that up?
I think that's a tougher thing, because the genes for vulnerability to alcoholism may originally have been genes for something else.
Got it.
We don't know. I think one always has to be careful about a gene for something. The vulnerability to alcoholism is genetic, but the genes may not have been originally for that. I mean,
got it. It's like a side effect of whatever else is going on in those genetics.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But all of us are designed. I mean, 9 million years ago, one of our primate ancestors had evolved a switch in a particular enzyme that made it easier to get the ripe fruit, and which had alcohol, and to be able to metabolize alcohol. And I think it's in the book that came out of the Dunbar conference, but I think made the argument that switch 9 or 10 million years ago allowed for that ape ancestor to survive. So we might be here because of alcohol too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of our ancestors was able to, and we identify ripe fruit by smelling alcohol.
Yeah.
That's how you and I know a cantaloupe is ripe. We feel it's kind of squishy, but we're also picking up the scent from the alcohol.
And so with this information, how do we help society, especially if you're like a mental health professional? How do you use this then to benefit us and to help us move forward without this society of no consequences, because we're not blamed for anything?
Yeah, well, I appreciate I get going and got.
Oh, no. I think it's very interesting.
What I guess I'm trying to get across is how we do it is knowledge. I think knowledge changes all of us. And if we know these things, I think, again, what I find important about this is that it backs us off from being judgmental about people who have problems. If you're a physician, if you're a mental health professional, the patient who is before you could not be other than they are.
Right.
So if you have somebody who is 50 years old and they're 100 pounds overweight and they've got diabetes and they're not taking their medication and they're depressed and they're drinking too much, it's very important not to get angry at them. Yes, that's frustrating, particularly if you're the physician having to take care of them or the mental health professional having to take care of them. But I think one of the most important things is that it backs us off of, being angry at them as if somehow they could have done differently.
Yes.
Right? As if somehow all of this complicated medical set of problems was somehow their fault, in a sense of morally responsible. They could have done differently.
Right.
Because we know that obesity and the bad lipid profile may have come from the fact that the individual's mother was, had food shortages when she was pregnant with this particular patient. I think that's one of the main things for mental health professionals is that the patient that is in front of you is the way they are through no choice of their own, no free will choice of their own. They're not a sinner who has wasted the eternal soul that God gave them by making bad choices, and then therefore they deserve to go to hell, or they deserve your negative critical judgment. I think that's where for me, that's the thing that I've been spending the most time thinking about is, okay, how does the absence of free will impact healthcare, the sort of therapeutic position that physicians, psychologists, social workers, LPCs, obviously I'm a mental health professional, so I'm particularly concerned about that, but how do we think about and approach our patients? And I think this is one of the fundamental things is that they could not have done otherwise. And so, but they're open systems. They are open to influence. So how do we find the ways to influence them, to move them in different directions?
So for any,
that's why I went off on down the road on substances, because the vast, I don't know the numbers, but in my profession, we have vast numbers of people who are called dual diagnosed, meaning they have a major mental illness and a substance abuse problem. And so when I think, 80% of the homeless have chronic severe mental illness, and a huge percentage of them have substance abuse problems. And the idea of somehow they could have done otherwise, they're morally responsible for their misery. No. And so I think if you can put that aside, then you as the health professional are more open to helping them, more open to being committed to helping them, more understanding of their struggles, less, yes, we're going to make judgments in the sense of, okay, I'm making a judgment that this person has these set of problems, but it's going to move me away from, I'm going to be less judgmental. Hopefully I'm not going to be judgmental at all. But all of us are humans and all of us are vulnerable to it. So there will be moments where I'll get annoyed and I will be judgmental. But with this knowledge, hopefully I can bite my tongue and put that aside and wade into trying to maintain an empathic and compassionate stance and to be of help.
And so I also think it's interesting that whether or not you're judgmental isn't always up to you either. Like that's not a free will either, even if you try your hardest. So, but I do think
but that's a good point. You try your hardest and you try your hardest, but when you fail, you don't start beating up on yourself. Right. Okay. I got angry at Mrs. Smith, I was off my game. That was, I regret doing that, but I'm not a miserable sinner for getting angry at Mrs. Smith for not taking her,
right.
And
it wasn't sin
for continuing to smoke 2 packs a day, even though she's got emphysema and is on oxygen.
Right. And it isn't a sin to feel certain things that you feel. That's just how, like, that's not a free will either.
Yeah. So, I mean, which one of us can predict our next thought or feeling?
Right. Exactly.
And that's
exactly.
I think that's one of the key arguments against, the idea of free will. I mean, you and I can't, we're just sitting here and we can't choose what our next thought is going to be. I mean, we can try to steer it in certain directions, but.
Right. And I do think it's interesting that people externally, so like people who know me, might be able to predict my responses more so than I can. So that's also interesting. Like, I literally can't control whether I get emotional. I'm one of those people where even when I'm mad, I start crying, even though I don't want to be crying, and then I get madder. I cannot control that. If I could, I would. But the people around me, I'm willing to bet, would be able to predict when I would cry angry tears, because they know me and they have patterns that they witness, even though I can't control those thoughts and emotions.
Right. And so I think the implication of this work is, what do you do with that knowledge?
Yes.
Okay. And my argument would be, that about yourself. You may have some hypotheses about why you're that way, and you think about it to see if that helps you understand it. And you're open to your friends' help, and you're open to your friends saying, are you getting kind of angry there? You're crying. And you don't beat up on yourself. You don't say, God damn it, why am I this way? Every time I get angry, I just start crying. I'm such an idiot.
I do say that to myself.
It's like, no. I mean, that's how you are. We don't know. We can make some hypotheses, maybe, of looking at your developmental history, but even then, it's a hypothesis at best.
Yes. And I think also something important for people who are listening is the difference between not being able to have the free will to control maybe how you feel, what you're thinking, your response to something, but there is the ability to find resources to teach you how to adjust those things. For example, like, if I have an anger problem, I don't want to live my life having an anger problem. I want to approach a professional who might be able to help me manage that anger problem. Or if I have an addiction to alcohol, I probably don't want to live with that daily addiction to alcohol unchecked. You can go to an external source and get the resources that you need to manage that. So it's not that we're saying, oh, the way you are is the way you are, and that's never going to change, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you're hopeless. We're saying there's nothing you can do about it, but there are things that can be done about it, if that makes sense. Like, you can't change that.
You did not of your own free will choose to be that way.
Right.
But I want to circle back to something you just said. Yes, you go to try to get some help from somebody, say, who specializes in anger problems. But here's where I think it also helps being an informed patient and an informed consumer, because you don't want to go to a therapist who's going to be critical. Why are you this way? You shouldn't be this way. How long have you been this way? Why did you not give this up when you got therapy before? When you sense that you are seeing a therapist who is judgmental, who is critical, who approaches you as if you could have been different, then I think you want to pause. And I think my own bias is that one of the most important things that we can do is to educate healthcare professionals, and particularly mental health care professionals. I mean, all of us are human, and we're still going to operate as if we have free will. The illusion of free will is not going to go away. But if we understand that that's an evolved part of us, and that in reality, we don't have free will, and that our patients are the way they are because, for reasons that began 1 second ago to, 10 billion years ago, that's a different stance. All of us operate as if the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. That's in our language, right? The sun is rising in the east and it is setting in the west. And we perceive that. The sun goes across, Earth is flat. I mean, that's our gut feeling and our perception, and it's in our language. But all of us are now educated, and we know, thanks to Copernicus, that is not right, right? That, that we're revolving around the sun. A little bit different. We all have that knowledge, but you and I still perceive it differently. Well, it's the same sort of thing. You and I are going to operate as if, when I chose the coffee ice cream, it's because I wanted the coffee ice cream, right? And I'm going to say, God damn it, I should have had the strawberries, But then we can stop and say, I tried not to eat it, but I did, and I don't know why. And okay, next time I'll try to get the strawberries. But I chose that coffee for ice cream for reasons that, I sort of understand, but I don't. And now, I can't go back and reverse it. So I'll just try, I was probably feeling under stress and the ice cream felt a little bit better. But, and I think that's a fundamental difference. And it's a difference that I think all healthcare professionals and mental health care professionals ought to have. In terms of moral responsibility, you didn't choose to rob that bank at age 16, or you chose to rob the bank, but for reasons that you were largely, unaware of.
Mm-hmm.
It was bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
And you're beating up on yourself about it. They put you in jail for a while, I think a little bit longer than you deserve, but okay, let's not feel like, and don't let the ministers tell you that you've permanently sinned. I mean, you didn't ask to, you didn't choose your parents. You didn't ask to be born in the projects. You didn't, ask for a drug addicted mom.
Right.
Those were probably factors. Those weren't your choices out of free will.
Right.
Okay. It was, it was unfortunate, but let's make the best of what we got in front of us.
Right.
There's still an open system and we can influence it.
Right. And even on a smaller scale, I think it's interesting how many people don't realize that some of the things that they're feeling and some of the things that they're doing are for reasons they don't anticipate. For example, I remember reading several years ago, I don't remember exactly where I read it, but it was a study that said that people who get less than 6 hours of sleep a night are more likely to consume a larger number of calories over their, daily allotment than people who get enough sleep. And so maybe you are struggling to lose weight. Maybe you are having particular cravings for those ice creams, like the coffee ice cream and things like that. And you're thinking to yourself, like, I'm just weak. I'm an idiot. I'm dumb. When really you have no idea it's because you've been sleeping for 5 hours a night. You have no idea those two things are correlated in any way. But your genetics, basically your body is responding to the first thing. And all you know is that for whatever reason, you cannot get that ice cream out of your mind. It never even occurs to you that you should have gone to bed 3 hours earlier the night before.
That is a fabulous example, and I'm going to borrow.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Because there's an old CBS 60 Minutes where they interviewed some of the people who discovered that, and my memory may not be accurate on this, but I think it was a woman physician in Minnesota or something like that, and she did this great stuff where people who'd slept 5 or 6 hours, their blood sugar levels were up and they would choose pizza. And the people that slept the right amount, their blood sugar levels were different. And, and they didn't choose the pizza. It's just, it was a great, God knows how long it was ago, but I remember that CBS 60 Minutes and it was jaw dropping.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There was a period of time where I thought I wanted to be a personal trainer and a nutritionist. And I learned a lot about how when you think you know what's like wrong or what's going on, it's typically the opposite thing. Like if your upper back is sore, it's probably because of something going on with your lower back, as opposed to what can I do to my upper back to make it feel better? Same with that. Like you think I'm just craving these foods because I'm weak and I don't have the ability to say no, when in reality, what you have no idea is that the way you've been sleeping or the lack of water you've been drinking or something completely unrelated is what's making you respond in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that says, or, you've been stressed for the last 3 months, more stressed about stuff at work than you realized.
Yep.
And what to me is the fact, and that unbeknownst to you, when your mother was pregnant with you in the first trimester of pregnancy with you, she went through food shortage, and there were epigenetic changes that impacted your lipid profiles, your appetite, and your weight regulation mechanisms.
So then what can people do? So say somebody's listening to this and they're like, that makes a lot of sense. I need to sleep a little more. Maybe I need to drink some more water. I might need to see a mental health professional. What is it that they should do moving forward then to combat these negative drives that they have that they can't control and are part of their life, whether it's genetic or external, like the lack of sleep? How do people then move forward knowing this about themselves without thinking it looks bleak because they can't do anything about it?
Well, I think you just pointed at the crux of the matter, that people hear that no free will as fatalism, that they can't do anything about it. When I think it's exactly the opposite. It opens you up to being able to do things about it. You become less preoccupied with blame and embarrassment and shame and self-criticism. And that's what I think is the crucial thing here, because everybody, lack of free will, oh God, it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Whereas exactly the opposite, if there's no free will and I'm just, being pushed down the stream of life by factors I don't know about, well, what I best do is just look at the stuff that's floating in front of me and try to move to the places that I think would be of help. And I think the main thing is, again, what's the old rule about the crucial things in business? Location, location, location. I think the crucial thing on this is education, education, education. And I strongly recommend people read Sam Harris's 2012 book. It's just like 40 pages, called Free Will. Read Sam Harris's book. He's got great YouTube podcast. They're great. He's given multiple talks on this, and I think just watching his videos on this, I think are another excellent introduction. Robert Sapolsky in October will publish his book on the subject. I think it's going to be called Determined. Oh, I mean, I've been waiting for this book since I heard it. But he's given a number of interviews. There's a great interview of him on the Huberman Podcast. The neuroscientist Huberman has a podcast interview of him that's good. There's a man whose name I can't remember, who created a great website, which is he's got one website which is sort of or on his website he's got one thing that's a summary of Sam Harris's ideas. On another link of his, he's got a summary of Sapolsky's ideas. Also, Sapolsky wrote a book a couple years ago called Behave, and you can read chapter. I think it's chapter 16 in his book. Is on the whole issue of free will, and he focuses in particular on the criminal justice system. And I think it's like a precursor to the book that's coming out. But I think if people will just educate themselves, and Jerry Coyne, the biologist, has a website, why evolution is true, and he's addressed free will a number of times, not as much as the others. He's also got an excellent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education on free will. But I think if people will just educate themselves, I think it's enormously liberating, actually.
Absolutely. Now, in a similar vein, I just thought about this. In a similar vein, if we cannot control and are not technically responsible for the reasons why we are how we are, does that also mean we can't take credit for any of the good stuff because we technically didn't earn it? You know what I mean? Like if you're a really good singer or if you're a really good artist or something like that, does that fall under the same like, well, I mean, good for you, but you also, that's a bunch of factors other than yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's the flip side. I mean, one need not feel as much. One need not feel self-criticism and blame and embarrassment and shame. The flip side of that is, watch out for pride, because if we can't take the credit for our good fortune in other areas, and much of this is just luck. And I think the approach is one of humility before the facts, and you're grateful for your good luck at having musical abilities and grateful for the fact that you have whatever the internal forces were that led you to practice and practice and practice and practice.
That diligence.
Become even better. But yeah, that's another aspect of this.
Very interesting.
And I think it creates a position of humility. It creates a position of compassion. It creates it's incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
And you're not responsible for the past. I think you are. One is, again, responsible for one's present. One takes this knowledge and tries to, push in certain directions.
Yeah. But it's the difference between, sorry, did not mean to interrupt you.
No. But always with an internal voice of kindness towards yourself.
It's the difference between knowing what you know about yourself and basically wallowing in it versus knowing what you know about yourself and reading up, studying, getting in touch with maybe mental health professionals or physical professionals who can help you change those things about yourself or improve the drive that you naturally have to do those things that negatively impact you.
Yeah, I think that not being internally preoccupied.
Right.
Not being internally preoccupied, which, I mean, we've all got there are limits on our cognition. There are limits on our cognitive abilities, and to use what cognitive abilities we have to focus on others and focus on life and focus on, trying to improve, commit to making our own lives better and the lives of other people better, and regrets about things in the past, but not being preoccupied with recriminations.
Very interesting. Very good. Interesting. So I want to be respectful of your time. I recognize we're coming to the top of our hour here that I took from you. But if you had a piece of advice for somebody who is maybe a mental health professional or they're interested in getting involved in that field at some point in their life, what would you say to them in terms of this lack of free will? How would you address that? What would you tell them in terms of taking that knowledge with them and going into the field?
Well, I think, again, it's just like if you're going to become a heart surgeon, you hopefully want to become an expert in the anatomy of the heart, right? If you're going to go into a mental health profession and become, in a sense, an expert in human nature, then I think you want a fundamental education in this area. And it doesn't, even though this stuff is coming from neuroscientists, Sapolsky, Sam Harris, Coyne is an evolutionary biologist, you don't require a scientific education to understand this. This is all laid out in ways that's actually, remarkably easy to see. And Sam Harris in particular has great examples that you just instantly can see in yourself the absence of, the absence of free will. So I think that would be my main advice: is that you get that fundamental stance. It's just like the Copernicus. I mean, all of us know Copernicus and Galileo. but we live differently. All of us are still going to live as if we have complete free will, but we know differently, so that when we are working with patients, when we're in the field, we're coming from a therapeutic position with our patients of they could not be different from who they are. That the person in front of you is that way for reasons that begin a second ago and go back millions of years.
Right.
They could not be other than they are in front of you. And I think that gives you a platform, any healthcare professional,
right,
to then engage them and to try to help them without being burdened with that they're sinful or they're bad or they deserve punishment or retribution, or they could have quit smoking last year before they had to go on oxygen. They could have they could have not robbed the bank when they were 17. And I think that's just an incredibly liberating position, I think, for any healthcare professional, mental health care professional, or any other healthcare professional.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple education to have.
Yeah.
And it's as they say, it's not rocket science, or it's not, even though it's based on neuroscience, you don't need the neuroscience to understand this. It's just, once you see it, it's all just obvious intuitively.
Right.
Very quickly, the illusion of free will just sort of falls away before your eyes. That's one of the things I just loved about it. As I started reading this, and it was like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
It just made tons of sense.
Yeah. And something I think is interesting growing up in a religious household is that in the church, there's this idea that everybody has free will. So you better not act up, because you're given the opportunity to do whatever you want, but you better do the right thing. And it seems like people have the ability to recognize when they don't like what other people are doing, but they don't have the ability to match that up with the fact that they can't control a lot of what they're doing. I feel like we see this in church. I feel like a lot of times we see this in like with cases with obesity and overeating or addictions. We see like, how dare that person do that? And you're like, yes. Okay, so you're saying that you can pick literally any other craving that you want. Well, it's not my fault that I want the ice cream. It's very interesting that people experience every single day these uncontrollable urges, whether they're positive or negative. We experience them every single day, feelings, thoughts, physical things that we can't control of any sort. And yet at the same time, we don't apply that exact same thought process when looking at other people. We don't think maybe they did just wake up with that feeling or that thought this morning. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep. Instead, we're so quick to judge them. So I feel like the absence of free will not only is relieving to me, because I can say, okay, I cannot control anything that's happened up until this time, but I can control what I'm going to do about it. Now that I know this about myself, how I'm going to approach it from here on out. And then it also gives us the ability to say that about other people. Like, I can't control what that person did. They can't help what their urges were, but maybe I can have the patience with them to help them figure out what it is they're going to do about it as well.
Right. They're still an open system, and they're open to influence. All of us are open to influence and knowledge. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, some of the most poisonous stuff, I think, is the legacy of religion, and in this country, the Christianity, and the idea that you're got this eternal soul, and that if you're not saved by Jesus, that you're going to hell, and if you do these things, you're unredeemable sinner. And I mean, you just go down that poisonous hole, and this is a completely different stance.
Right.
And obviously, I think it's incredibly liberating.
I do too.
Exactly the opposite. And there's something else you said that Oh yeah, Sam Harris said something about, it's not that we don't have any control over the storm or that we're lost in the storm. It's that we are the storm. We all have these feelings, these contradictory feelings simultaneously. We don't know our next thought until it surfaces, our next feeling until it surfaces, and you just try to do the best you can with it, and with the humility of knowing that you can't know where all this stuff comes from, and a lot of your good fortune is good luck, and you try as best you can, and you don't crucify yourself if you fail.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Andy Thomson, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of break this down for me. The minute you said that,
I will do this for hours, obviously, because I was going to say, I thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, because I think, as I said, I think this knowledge is just crucial. I mean, it's out there. You see a lot of it as being in the discussions on criminal responsibility in the criminal justice system, where it absolutely belongs. But there's also this whole other area of the importance of this for all healthcare professionals, all patients. Right. That's all of us.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, especially with things like TikTok and social media and Facebook, we get a much larger exposure to just how many of these professionals do have those judgments. It never would have occurred to me that a nurse or a doctor or a therapist would prejudge their patients until we give people these platforms where they can post their opinions before they think about the consequences, And so you do find out about therapists saying things like that and doctors saying things like that. And I think you're right. I think this information is very important, and it's liberating, in my opinion, but also it kind of gives us this idea of, so now what? Now what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And it gives us the opportunity to be honest with ourselves about what we're dealing with, the tools that we have. And now that we know this, how are we going to use those tools? And I think that's just magnificent. I would love to talk to you sometime about how this applies to the prison system. I feel like that could be a 2-hour conversation in terms of, if there is no free will, what do we do with justice, or is there such a thing as justice?
Yeah, no, that's huge. And there are people writing about it. And I would look at, since you're interested in it, I would go right to Sapolsky's chapter 16 in the book Behave, because his focus on the absence of free will has to do with the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And I think he also has a talk on it that I don't know if it's a TED talk, but he's got a thing where it's all focused on free will and
I can find all of those and link them
I think
in the description.
And I had this memory of, I think he starts with the example of how he himself, if he'd had the opportunity to kill Adolf Hitler, just how he could imagine the feelings of wanting to, basically, torture and kill Hitler. I don't know if he tortured, but he uses himself as an example of, all of us are vulnerable to these feelings of righteous indignation and retributive justice, and he starts from there and then shows you how let's back up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to find the books that you've talked about, the authors, the different videos and articles. I've written them all down. I'm going to include them in the description, so anybody listening will have access to those. But if you think of any after this, feel free to send me links.
Sure. And if you can't find those, let me know, and I'll be happy to send them to you and to the
Absolutely.
audience.
That would be awesome.
I can't thank you enough for the opportunity, because obviously I think this is just unbelievably important stuff going forward.